And welcome the Outperformer community. I appreciate all of you joining us today for yet another webinar that we're running for accounting and finance professionals that we work with day in, day out on their careers, on their performance in their career, and on the performance of their teams. And as I always do, I spend the start of these webinars just making sure that we're all settled in, we're ready to rock and roll with yet another interesting conversation. And today's topic is certainly something very close to my heart. I'll be introducing that in a moment, and for most of you there, you'll see my good friend Andy Cott on the screen. I'll introduce him. But while everyone's settling in, if you're on my side of the world, it'll be a nice morning. We've got the sun out in Sydney. And hopefully you're listening this on the train to work, or maybe you've just entered the office. And if you're on Andy's side of the world, you'd probably be winding up the day and hopefully settling back to do a little bit of thinking about this topic of value creation. But we've got a huge audience. People all over the world have registered for this. I think one of the fantastic pieces about where we're going with the Outperformer and a lot of the partners that we work with, like Andy, is that we're certainly building a fantastic conversation around where the future of finance is going, and I guess what the potential impact of finance can be as we mature and embrace what the future brings us. So it's a very exciting time for us now. Just doing a little bit of talking while everyone's settling in and people are coming into the room for a few housekeeping components of this webinar. We certainly encourage questions throughout the session, and that you can do that by using the question box. I'll be fielding those for Andy today and myself. So fire away by simply answering there. Now, if everyone that is on the webinar today could just put a quick hello in that question box to tell me you know how to use it, and welcome you to this session. Say hi, or there we go. Thank you. Everyone's jumping into it. Outstanding. So the question box clearly works. We've got a jam-packed session today. I've got Andy Cott here. For anyone who doesn't know Andy, I'm just going to briefly introduce Andy. I'm not going to steal all his thunder. I'm going to let Andy do a little bit of the talking, but certainly want to make sure people are familiar with Andy and why we've got Andy on the show today. Andy, if you don't know him already, you've probably been living under a rock. He is the host of and the creator of Strength in the Numbers, which is one of the world's leading podcasts in the space of accounting and finance careers, and broadly the future of this entire community. And he has brought numbers of people together across this community, across the world, to talk about what we're all facing in terms of the journey of finance. He's done a fantastic job in doing that. You should, if you haven't already, get onto Strength in the Numbers, listen to the podcast, have a listen to some of the historic pieces of work he's done with some of the speakers he's brought together. There's some fantastic people on there. And for a guy that's a busy man working his day job as well, he's certainly a passionate human being for giving back to the community. Today's topic, as I said, is about value creation. And the other reason I've decided to bring Andy on is Andy is someone that has invested countless hours and a lot of energy into really defining what value creation is in finance. It's a passion project of his. Today you'll see that passion turn into some really tangible insights and things you can take away back to your organization, back to your own careers, and use that in the way that you navigate through this concept of value creation, which, to be fair, is a bit of a buzzword, is something that's thrown around. I was saying to Andy just before the show, nearly any time I speak to an accounting and finance professional, I ask them about their career or what they're trying to achieve or what's important to them, and they tell me they want to add value. They tell me they want an environment where they can add value, and then when you start to define that concept of adding value, it's really hazy, and that's okay. It's a fairly interesting topic, and I think today will really shine the light on how do we define it, how do we bring it to life, what are the assets that Andy uses and has designed in the way he thinks through this concept. We'll be also looking at not only the assets in terms of what they are, but how you can enhance them and bring them to life in your role. Now, enough from me. Andy, thanks very much for joining us. Love you to quickly introduce yourself, put a bit of context as to where this passion comes from, mate. I'm curious. I'm sure the listeners are very curious about how you've ended up doing so much work in this space.
Yeah, thanks a mil, Brad. And look, I just want to welcome everyone as well. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Really appreciate everyone who's come on and registered. And Brad, I really think you're doing a fantastic job, you and the rest of the team at the Outperformer. And I love what you're doing, which made it a very easy decision to come and join you at this late hour here from West Cork in Ireland. So yeah, so look, where did this passion come from? Before I jump straight into that, I just want to sort of make a side note, which is, I suppose, in terms of business is fundamentally about people. So when I look at value creation or anything that teams I lead or any work that I do, it's always about the people involved. So it's ultimately business. Business is about people, and that can sometimes get lost in the numbers. And I suppose I was fairly fortunate in terms of my upbringing. My father was a sales person. He actually used to go and deliver bread. So any spare time I had at the weekends, I was actually on the road with him, delivering bread or selling bread to restaurants, bars, supermarkets of larger chains. And I suppose I picked up a few good things about dealing with people along the way. And then I suppose, interestingly enough, as I got a bit older, and when we moved to England and I was sent back to Ireland, my summers were spent helping my uncles on my mother's side. And they were salespeople as well. So I got an awful lot of training in sales and adding value to people. So when I left school, a lot of my friends went to university. I had just jumped into sales. And my first role was selling sugared water or carbonated soft drinks. So Pepsi would have been the main brand I would have been selling. But for those in the British members of the audience, they might remember Tango. That was one of our other products. And I used to sell those to bars and restaurants and clubs. And I suppose I was also told I was very good with numbers, always wrong. And it was that marrying of the two. So we used to get these sales cheat sheets. And I didn't really like how they were structured. I felt they were a bit sort of on the sleazy side of things. So what I did is I wrote my own ones, which really were from the retailer's perspective. And they were all about, this is what, if you were to buy our products, this is the potential returns you could have. Little did I know at the time, it was my first foray into scenario planning and financial modeling through the eyes of the customer. And the great thing was, they started buying into this and actually referring me to other accounts. So it meant that I was, picking up a lot of interest, and it was very easy to create customers, so to say. And it was that was another thing as well. It was very much target driven. Okay, my first month I didn't make my targets, but after that I was able to meet the numbers every single month because I'd figured this out. It was all about delivering for people, delivering value for people, and I'd even tell them the prices of my competitors' products. So Coca-Cola, I knew what the prices were and where they could get them from. So I'd be completely open. If they could get a better deal from the competition, they should get it. I had their interest in mind. Yeah. So that was good. And I was very lucky as well. I think I mentioned to you previously that I came across a book called The 1 Minute Salesperson by Ken Blanchard. And that encouraged me to see selling or salespeople. He had a way of capturing it. He called it salesperson with $1 for the S. And a break in between sales and the person, because behind every sale there's a person. So that's why he put the person there. And the dollar symbol instead of the S for salesperson was to reinforce us. It's all about providing value for people. And that's always stayed with me. And I encourage our finance audience to read that book. It's a very quick read, and I would read it fairly regularly every year just to keep that concept front of mind. But look, doing 18 calls a day, field visits, it was field sales. I am an introvert at heart, so it was never really going to be a long-term career for me. And being good with numbers, accounting just felt like a nice fit. So I fell into that world. My first job in accounting was in an accounts department in the mailroom, where I was scanning invoices into the first ever machines. And as I was scanning invoices in, because of my experience from my previous job, I realized that it was a whiskey manufacturer, so I could see the invoices go through for the bottles, the bottle caps on pallets, but I didn't see many credit notes for the pallets. And as we delved deeper and I checked with the controller, they should have been getting more credit notes. They just didn't have a control system to get the pallets. So they put me at a computer terminal, and once I totaled it all up, we were due back about £1 million worth of credit notes of pallets. So it was an assignment whilst I was on a summer from college. I did 12 weeks, and at the end of it, they gave me a 2-week bonus. Said, really well done, really appreciate it. And I started my SEMA qualification then as well. And I was sort of hooked on creating value in finance. And my passion grew. And I said, look, I used to do that again and again. And then I said, look, is there any way of scaling it better? So I said, yeah, maybe if I become a leader. So about the time I was qualifying, I started taking leadership roles on. And to be honest with you, Brad, and it's like I sort of really sucked at it. I don't think my training really prepared me for the world of leadership. I really wanted to scale value creation, and I wasn't very good at it. So look, then I was lucky enough to come across mentors who helped me sort out the mess I was making for myself and for others. And my first hire was an MBA grad, and he was a great mentor to me. And I know it's a bit reverse mentoring, but he showed me how I should lead. And that was a good template for me for the rest of my career. And the whole idea of mentors really led to the Strength in the Numbers show. It was my way of giving back because people had invested so much in me. And I also love the power of numbers. And just to maybe close on one point there, Brad, one of the previous guest mentors said, if we just chose to be 1% better every day, the power of numbers means that will compound across the year to be 3,678% better. So the numbers can drive a lot of value creation. So we have two real passions. One is for creating value for folks, and two is it's just the power of numbers in general.
So it'd be 36 times better if I just did 1% a day.
Yeah, it's nuts, isn't it?
Amazing. Mate, I love that story, and I think it's through some of these unique beginnings that we build a different perspective and a different way of looking at the world, and it's certainly different to many of the traditional careers that some of the people online may have. I want to move forward and really start to talk about this adding value concept and just dig a little bit deeper and really set the scene for this conversation today. And as I said before, it's difficult for some people to articulate what does adding value mean, what does this value creation concept mean. So if you can come up with a simple way to explain that so that it's easy for a leader to share that with a team member, it's easy for me to walk and look at myself in the mirror and say, I understand what value is. I'd love you to tell a bit of a story or just shape that in a way that helps people understand.
Yeah, that's really important, Brad, because by the way, I completely understand this because as a leader or even as a finance professional, that whole concept of value can be quite intangible to get at. So I always often refer to this as grasping at water. Have you ever seen how difficult it is to grasp at water? And for me, that sets the scene nicely for talking about value, because value can change depending on the context. So let's imagine we've a finance director, and they've a lovely lawn. Actually, let's say it's a finance director from Australia, right? You guys get lovely winters. So they want to keep their lawn clean and green instead of red and dead. So they've got a sprinkler system or a hose pipe that keeps it nice and watered. And you probably think they probably don't regard the value of that water that much. I mean, they probably wouldn't regard it any more or less than maybe running their tap for some drinking water. But then let's say later that evening, they go to a local restaurant and they feel a bit flushed, as a finance professional might do. They might even stretch to an imported bottle of still water with their meal. So something flash like a Perrier or an Evian to go with their dinner. And for that, they might splash out a couple of bucks. So the values already started changing depending on the context. And then let's say they, I don't know, a couple of weeks after that, go for a holiday to North Africa, for instance. And on arrival at the hotel, they're a little thirsty, but they don't fancy going up to their room, running the tap and drinking straight from the tap water of their North African hotel. So they might spend maybe $5 or $6 at the hotel lobby for some water.
Yeah.
So then the value changes. And then you know what? Let's say they take a trip the following day out to the desert. And in their rush, they forgot to apply the right controls to their area. They go out and they forget to bring water with them. So how much do you think they'd be paying for water after a baking day in the heat of 40 degrees Celsius or 100 degrees Fahrenheit? I'd say they're probably paying a fair bit.
It's
So,
almost like Visa at its priceless.
oh, it's probably,
Mark,
yeah, you're pushing it, you're pushing it that way, right? So like this is the thing. I mean, this is the thing with value. It changes. It's a watery concept. It changes depending on the context, and ultimately, values in the eye of the beholder, as the old saying goes. Okay, so beauty, value, it's all in the eye of the beholder. But the great thing in finance is we've got this traditional access to stakeholders, the decision makers, and we've also got this tremendous access to data, which means that we've got the ability to generate a lot of value in the business. So in my mind, value creation for us in finance is about driving the business forward by giving them insights to help them create value, and also then helping them implement those decisions that follow from it to go and capture some of that value, right? And like that's I was going to throw a slide up there, Brad, because in my mind, you can't have value creation without capturing some of that value as well. Otherwise, we're not making full use of our potential. And I've borrowed this diagram from the BCG, the Boston Consulting Group mix, and I've just changed the dimensions, but ultimately you can sort of read into it very similarly for finance. And like, even if you use our traditional net present value as a guide to how we approach this, I mean, it simply states that, if you increase cash flows, reduce cash outflows or leakage, and one thing we do quite well in finance is reduce risk of our decisions for the business. Yes. Overall, we can increase value. And like, we've been doing this for thousands of years. I mean, where we've ended up now, I mean, our profession goes back 4,000 years. There's a great book, The Richest Man in Babylon, and that's set about 2000 BC, where we were recording financial transactions and non-financial transactions, for that matter, in clay tablets. And we've been pretty much recording transactions, reporting, doing tax returns for many thousands of years. And it's only been in later times that we've been sort of forced to step up and change. So I would say probably for most of our history, Brad, we've been developing very strong compliance skill sets.
Absolutely.
And that allows us then to check in with, okay, what are our transactions? What are financial data? What are our reporting? What is it that we see happening in our organizations? And that's what we've done very well. Then I suppose, what would have been the major innovation? I've got in there Luca Pacioli's invention of double entry. So we even made that process better. But up until, I suppose, the first industrial revolution in the 19th century, we haven't really had to develop that much. We've not been under much pressure. But the thing is, when those industrial revolutions hit us, when we started having to buy machinery or adopt scientific management techniques, we then started developing KPIs, return indicators, return on assets, gross margin percent, tax shields, things like that, which then we were forced to examine and move into sort of controllership type skill sets in terms of adding value back to the business. So then we started answering questions like, why something happening, or getting a bit more real time and say, what's happening in the business right now that we can affect? And that's where controllership came in. And it was only, I suppose, with maybe the third industrial revolution, which was around computer and networking power. And more recently, I suppose, with the dawn of cognitive computing or augmented intelligence, where machines are helping us do our jobs better, that we've actually started to move into more of an advisory space. And I think a lot of our audience would appreciate that, in terms of us now being able to answer questions a bit easily around, what should we be doing? What are the implications of a decision? And not only just stopping there, which, these will create value, but then go and capturing is like, how can we make it happen for the business? And being that sort of true added value advisor. So I do think, there's a massive range for us to be adding value, so much potential to add value in the business. But I do have a little concern, and it's in the bottom right here when it comes to capturing it. We've had some tremendous innovations about 50 years ago, finance business partnering and financial planning and analysis. And it's only now I'm sort of seeing the conversation move to them, but these concepts are over 50 years old. So We're not probably the fastest at adopting the latest ideas out there, but we are having them. So that's why I enjoy these forums, Brad, is so that we can start having conversation around, in finance, our value generating assets.
Absolutely, absolutely. That was Stanley Harding back in 1963, wasn't it, at Shell, who
Oh,
came up with this idea of business partnership, and of course it's been floating around, but unfortunately our evolution in partnership hasn't moved at any pace since then.
it
To the
hasn't.
point where we're capturing that value as you described.
Yeah, well said. And this thing is, I don't know, are we just conservative as a
Mm.
profession? I don't know the reasons why. All I know is that, look, people are having great ideas, and maybe we should start embracing some of the great ideas we're seeing and hearing out there.
Absolutely. And I think just to add to what you said, and we see this a lot in the programs we develop, is to help define value and value creation, is to see value living at the intersection of a problem and a solution. And when we look at this concept really simply, whatever financial metrics or numbers that we put around a situation is only captured when that is realized into a solution. And up until that point, the person that owns that problem or has that goal or sees that opportunity will not see the full value of that opportunity. And it's very abstract, and it's a little bit academic in the way we describe it. But maybe as we move through this, we'll start to put some color to it and show how that plays out in business. Now, the thing I want to start to explore now, and I think just to build on where you landed there, is you've talked to me in the show preparation for this, and talking to all the attendees today, we share this concept of the 6 value generating assets that we have as finance professionals. So you take me through the 6 assets, what they are, and maybe just a little bit of color around why they are what they are.
Yeah, that's good. I suppose I'm a little nervous sharing them, I suppose, because I put a lot of work in building these up over years, so I'm curious to see what the audience thinks. But it's sort of like, sometimes I think, oh, like they're all around us anyway, right? We're surrounded by these assets. We see them day in, day out, whether it's the policies we have to go implement, or the reports we produce, or how we interact with our decision makers. They're all there. They're all around us every day, but I don't think we probably appreciate them as much as we could or should. And I know we may be touting our own horn a bit here, but it's a bit like having your nose pressed up against a masterpiece. How do you know it's a masterpiece unless you step back a bit and appreciate it a bit from a distance? And it's like back to this expression of unlocking the door to value creation. I think we need to do similarly. I think our leaders, and also us as professionals, we need to step back and actually look at what's in front of us and appreciate it, because around us at the moment, with the rates of change, and you saw how things are getting compressed with the industrial revolutions and the pressure that's causing us, it's a bit of a whirling mess sometimes around us. But we do have 6 value generating assets, and it comes back. I mean, I actually got a nice little diagram here. Is I did a bit of a sketch of a car, and I look at finance as like the wheels propelling the car forward, driving value and value creation and capture in your organization. And you might notice on this car, it's got some rather special wheels. These are the wheels that I've designed, and there's I suppose in nuts and bolts of these wheels are 2 value disciplines that our stakeholders expect from us. They're around delivering them leading edge insights, also being able to influence and get to know them and understand, as you were saying there, Brad, those sort of have want gaps, what it is that they want versus what it is they think they have. And then anytime we're closing those gaps or influencing ways to close those gaps, that's actually a value creation opportunity. Showing them how to do that, it's value creation. But the way this works is that we've got to capture those, and to capture those we need to be operation excellent. That's how we make impact. So I call these the 3 I's. They're the nuts and bolts of those wheels propelling us forward. So any assets we develop must be done with the aim of serving those value disciplines, those key success factors for us. And that's where the 6 assets, in my mind, come from. And those 6 assets are, I suppose, the spokes, maybe the strength holding the wheels together. And coincidentally, they spell the word assets, so they're easier to remember. I find those things useful, but I'll go through them very quickly. So financial analysis everyone in our audience should appreciate this. in finance, we undergo a lot of technical training. There's been a lot of finance institutes set up. A lot of people got designations: ACAs, ACCAs, CPAs, CTAs, CMAs, CGMAs. You could get a very good alphabet soup out of ACs and Ms from our accounting profession bodies. So, but we, in all seriousness, though, we have invested a lot of training and technical skills in this space. Then we have strategic awareness, which relates to our ability to see broadly across the business, to figure out and connect the dots, and also articulate what's going on. The bit then that I'm finding we could be perhaps stronger on from an asset perspective, but some of us are around our social intelligence skills, tuning into those have-want gaps, right, and adapting our responses to bring the business with us so we can then engage them on the commercials. And that's really about anticipating and aligning with their needs. We have these tremendous access already to decision makers that we've been developing with the past 4,000 years. So we have this access. Now it's about engaging on the commercials, making sure decisions are aligned. And then in terms of making the impact, making it happen, that tech and data savvy coming into play. And that's really cool at the moment. There's so much being talked about in this area, whether it's a narrow artificial intelligence solution or maybe something a bit broader or machine learning, helping us take those insights, taking that data we've access to, the financials and the non-financials, combining it together. I mean, I do a lot of work in the pricing space, and I mean, only recently we looked at some non-financial data in terms of parts dispatches and bounce them up against failure rates and also our profitability to figure out customer profitability. So it was combining financial and non-financial, unlocking value for the sales team in that case. And then there's the sparring partner. And this comes back to our, I suppose, perceived independence and objectivity within our organizations. And, you know, challenging that, using that to challenge the business on making better decisions to drive better numbers. You know, knowing when to say yes, but also say no, but maybe we could do this instead to help our businesses, give them what it is that they want and help them towards their goals. So we have these fantastic assets. And I think I've distilled them to these 6. And now it's important knowing them is then going to nurture and enhance them in our organizations because we do so well and there's some we could do better.
Absolutely. And I might just ask a couple of extra questions on these because I think for people in the audience, feel free to ask questions at any time. But for myself, when I look at the 6 that you've got there, I think 4 of them for my we don't actually invest significantly in terms of learning and development and focus in our younger generation of new accountants and new finance professionals all the way through to leadership. But I'd be curious on your opinion there in terms of things like social awareness you mentioned before. You know, we have lots of conversations about where does the value lie in a piece of work you're doing. And I've seen this happen quite a number of times and went through a program the other day where someone was talking to us about a particular project that they're involved in being so important to the organization. And we looked at, well, where is that value? Where does it lie? And the instinct for this individual who is completely capable, really talented individual was that project is new and my involvement in it is really important because, you know, no one else is there to do it, right? And that's what I do. And of course, you know, my first instinct was, okay, well, if I said to you, I've never crossed the harbour bridge before, would that make it valuable? And of course, that changed the paradigms. Well, what's on the other side of the bridge? Now, that's when we start to challenge, what are we really doing?
Yeah.
And why does it matter? So, you know, from a social context, what is it that the other person's trying to achieve? Really, the piece of work he was doing was so valuable because it was going to enhance sales and margin for the organization. And that was where the value actually lied. And from a social context point of view, that's what everyone else was driving towards. But it is very easy to get caught up on the analytical, the detail, the doing. In your opinion, and going back to that point I mentioned there, you know, about the fact that there's different focuses for our attention, where do you see the opportunity for the community if we do focus and enhance some of these assets in our careers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I suppose, Brad, I actually have done some work on this, because I look at these assets as, I think we've been traditionally strong in some of them, and I don't want to beat people up as like I don't want it to be a case of, oh look, we have weaknesses, oh dear, we can't go and add value. I think it's a case of, let's know our strengths and play to those, but also be mindful of areas we could be doing better and bring in complementary skill sets to help us. Our complementary experiences or mentoring or whatever to go help us do a better job at those and increase our ability or potential to go and create and capture value with our businesses and our decision makers. So look, I'll share some case study on that because I think it highlights particularly some asset areas that we could perhaps be stronger. So
Absolutely.
let's try to go into that there, Brad. So what I'm showing at the moment is a case study I've done. So I do support some smaller organizations outside of the work I do in my main day job. And this is a study, I did a case study with a commercial finance team, size of about 11, based across Europe and the US of various roles. And what I've done is over the years, I've created a way of doing a diagnostic on these 6 assets. And I call it the value potential pulse. So it just gives us a stake in the ground of what we do well and where we could perhaps do better. And red is an area where we could definitely do better. And the aim is to go towards green, and then try and get some balance across these assets. And what I found, whether it was in this case study or actually between the recent version of this, which I've created a beta version of this as a web app, so everyone can, or anyone can go in, undertake the questionnaire. It's 36 questions, and then they get a readout of where they're strong or where they can perhaps be stronger. What I typically keep finding is that it's our social intelligence and engagement assets that really could do with a bit of investment and a bit of balance. And really the social intelligence is really about getting, I suppose, attuned to what it is that the organization value. Coming back to the example of water, the context around what people value is a very personal thing to the decision makers. It's really about understanding what it is that they want and what they have. So I was just trying to think, funny enough, when there's an example popped into my head, is we tend to spend a lot of our time in finance investing more money into the financial analysis assets that we have. So one example was, I heard recently, there's an organization in Europe that spends €200,000 a year on their Excel training. And I was thinking, wow, what if they spent that amount of money on developing their social intelligence assets? What would they get a better bang for their buck there than topping up some skills that people are already pretty okay at, and that would the business value them as much. So I don't think we've probably been as smart as making investments in terms of what our organizations would perhaps value. So in terms of this case study, we had our work cut out, but it wasn't unusual to see this. So over the years, I've been developing ways of addressing this type of asset deficiency. And in my mind, when it comes to value, as long as we put that front and center of our minds, to quote Peter Drucker, what gets measured gets managed. So I was going to share a couple of the tools that we use in the process. So I ran an A-game workshop, which A-game because a lot of the assets manifest in traits, which all start with the letter A. And one of the tools we use is in a simulation. So we read a script out, do a role play. And the attendees at the workshop have to understand or discern by listening what it is that the stakeholders want and what it is that they have. And then the opportunity is the gap that they need to close. And then that type of simulation gives people a sense of what they picked up on, what they missed. So it gives them a sense of how strong they are, but it also gives them a practical application of the tool, and it engages them, gets the mind sort of focused on providing value. Okay, so this is one way of trapping that value. Those have want gaps. And anytime we solve a gap for our stakeholders between a have and a want, and we close that gap, we're adding value, maybe of different amounts and quantities, but we're adding value, and that slowly builds trust and engagement over time. Then there's a value log, which I think every person in finance should be keeping, because we are adding value. As I said, whether it's compliance, controllership, or advisory, we're adding value in some way, but maybe we're not trapping it in the right way. And another reason of having a value log is, again, focusing on measuring it. What gets measured gets managed. So the more we focus on tracking our value and measuring it, the more we will be adding more value. And it's just a very good flywheel. It helps us actually build even more momentum as the wheels of the car. So in effect, that's what the workshops taught them how to do. And another point on the value log is very important. If we do add value for the business, is ask for a testimonial. Ask for them to let our bosses know, or let our peers know, or whatever, however it needs to be trapped, because as business develop the business case for more investment in finance. Another thing that we did in terms of this case study was implement a mentoring program where we matched people with others who had stronger skills. So actually on that social intelligence asset, there was actually one person in the team who was extremely strong at the social intelligence skill sets. But that said, the rest of the team weren't as strong, so it brought the overall score down. And so we actually got them to mentor the rest of the team to actually improve their skills and actually start using the tools as well, together with that mentoring, to actually improve and address that asset deficiency. And then it helps being the founder of a podcast. I thought it was a novel idea, but we developed these AV, audiovisual accelerators, which honed in on some of the asset efficiency. So engagement was another one that could have been better. And one way of overcoming our engagement is to get out of our comfort zones. So produce these customized, tailor-made opportunities for, I suppose, the team to listen in on the way to work or in the gym. And by the way, I think when listeners write into me, they listen to the podcast in the most strangest of places. I'm not to judge. What I'm saying is that some people do benefit by audiovisual learning. So people, will learn in different ways. But ultimately, the aim of this was to get the pulse going more green. So what actually ended up happening was the points on the pulse increased by 12.4 points, 20%. And all the red areas, and there was a lot of pink as well, started turning more green and orange or amber. And I suppose that meant that once we started tending to those assets and improving those assets, the value potential of that finance organization, that team, went up. And I firmly believe that was more down to their focused attention. And this was only after 5 months. There was one thing, Brad, about the case that I wish I did, and I suppose as I work more in this space, we'll probably develop them, is having these smart cards, because it's about focused attention. So if you think about learning a language like French, best way to learn it is go and be fully focused on it. So go move to France, absorb yourself in the language, unlearn old habits, and learn the new ones you need to learn the language. So that's why I would love to develop smart cards so people could actually take them around with them and reference them at any time. Just pull them out the deck and go through them. But also people learn in their own ways and their own speeds. So I suppose it's a bit like an orchestra, right? When an orchestra comes together and we've got these amazingly talented and skilled people, and when they're getting ready, they're trying to tune their instruments, you have all these cacophony of different noises that are a bit out of place and a bit disjointed. But when they get in sync, when the conductor's got them in sync, boy, do they know how to perform. Boy, do they know how to deliver value. And it comes back to Hebb's law, what cells get wired together, fire together. And that's really what we need to do in finance, is get those assets in sync. And to do that, we need people engaged in them, working with them practically. So it's not the type of thing, I suppose, they can develop as they're doing their accounting qualifications. It's stuff that we need to make sure that they're engaged in, that they're using day to day. And if they're focusing on value creation and capture day to day, we'll definitely see more of that day to day.
Completely. And I think you've made some very, very intelligent and considered points there, and particularly the piece around what gets measured is managed. The Peter Drucker comment there is often where we fall down in the starting plate. And I think, if you asked anyone, and I'd be very curious for people on the call to let me know and Andrew know, have you gone out to measure your performance in the area of value creation? And have you measured the needs and the value that the stakeholders you serve are seeking? Now, we did a survey of 106 organizations by going to non-finance leaders across their business, and the results were that 72% have not been surveyed to question where value lies in terms of their ability to manage the organization. And interestingly, when we also asked them some other questions around where do you see value, what is it that you value from the finance function, what's the most important things that they can do for you, the two highest pieces were, and 58% of people noted this is the most important, the capacity for finance to support me with decision making by using their financial acumen. And the second highest, and this is a really interesting one, Andy, and I think you really appreciate this one, knowing you really well, is the capacity to understand me and my business, essentially empathy, right? The lowest ranking value areas in the eyes of non-finance leaders was accuracy and timeliness, systems and process skills, and at the 1%, I don't even know who may have noted this, but education. And sadly, where we put all of our energy at the start of our career in those three areas. So in terms of what you've just described there in that change, you've talked about the evolution of finance needing to be tipped on its head, and the type of thinking that you've put into value creation is almost the direct opposite to how we've started to develop our careers.
Yeah, isn't that nuts? That's interesting. I think there's a number of reasons for that, Brad. I suppose when we come out of our training, that's all we've seen for the past few years previously, is they're the areas that we've been trained in. It's the areas we're probably most comfortable in as well. And I suppose if we look at our leaders, the ones that typically tend to get promoted are the ones who are technically strong. They're the ones that stand out. So we've got people who are strong on the controls, compliance side of things, leading people who are going to then be focused on the controls, compliance, which isn't really, I suppose, in line with the social intelligence asset. And that's probably why it's the one that scores the most, the lowest, I suppose, in terms of, in terms of the web app. I mean, we had the web app up now a number of months, had a few hundred submissions into it, and that's the one that scores the lowest by far. I mean, I think the average for our profession is actually a low C. It's almost a D, which really in this day and age, if we're going to want to remain relevant as a profession, creating value and capturing value, we really need to improve on the probably non-core skills that we've been associated with. But luckily for us, there are some people in our profession who that can lead the way. That could be good mentors for us. And I do hope we start embracing some of what those people are saying.
Great. And I totally agree. And it's interesting, I just got a few comments on that surveying question we mentioned, and one in particular, and I know Jen very well, an organisation that does invest heavily into understanding and listening to their stakeholders, and I won't name that organisation publicly, but certainly gets feedback in the marketplace from my read on quality partnership, and in Jen's and in this business's environment, they focus heavily on how do we push this to the next level all of the time. But also, just building on what you were talking about there, what I also see, and I'd be curious for you, Andy, is in the modern career context of finance, those that are now being promoted a lot more regularly are actually demonstrating this value creation capacity. And if you think about the scoring, they're much higher. Your traditional CFO cannot survive without the strategic awareness, the social capability. Potentially, they could actually be a little lower on tech and data savvy and other areas. Certainly, the sparring partner strength there. So, do you see that weighting actually in the modern context of careers is a pretty good indicator on the senior leadership areas of finance?
Yeah, definitely. Let's start with the seniors. So look, I'll base my answers on empirically what I've seen via the value potential pulse. Okay, so we've had a number of senior leadership roles in finance completers, as well as more junior and middle level ones. And the one thing that really stood out across everything else was with the senior level ones. I'm talking CEOs, so finance professionals who become CEOs, CFOs and VPs scored A's or very high B's on impact. Yeah, delivering impact in their organization, that value discipline. When you looked at their scores on influence, they were pretty okay. They were broadly in line. And actually on the analysis side, they were broadly in line as well. But where they blew everyone else out of the water was on impact. Wow. And, so as much as we've been talking about social intelligence, so they did have very good skills. And actually, funny enough about CEOs, I just read a report there. I can't recall who it was by, but I think it was 24% of CFOs ended up becoming CEOs at some point in the future. I think that was of European listed companies. So when you make an impact in finance, it is noticed in the business. And I keep saying, there are people in our world who have actually been able to get there. But interestingly, though, I always try and figure out, though, has the impact led to their promotions, or have the promotions allowed them to cause a bigger impact? So does correlation imply causation or vice versa? And it's like, I'm not quite figured that one out, but it is telling in the data is that those in our senior position how to develop an impact. So we do have those assets and people are scoring highly on them. So if you want to get promoted, definitely it's worth considering, or if you want your team to deliver an impact, I think it's definitely worth considering how do we reduce the asset deficiencies we may have on our engagement, on our ability to be good sparring partners. So finance business partnering comes into the play there, and FP&A. How do we improve our asset deficiencies in there so we can improve our impact and then score more highly? And as we score more highly, we increase our value potential as well.
Absolutely. And of course, one would enhance the other, right? They certainly all counteract and support each other.
We've just had it's very interlocking.
Yeah, I've just had, there's been a few, and thank you for everyone that's commenting and sharing different ideas in the question box. I just had a really interesting one from David, who really pointed out something quite interesting. Some of these core finance skills are points of parity. We're not differentiated on them anymore, in his opinion. And what he does say is that these value adds and the social capability, the strategic awareness, the pieces that you've highlighted in those 6 assets, they are the differentiators between the good and great. And you've just highlighted that there, I guess, in the points you've made about the senior leadership, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, you don't have to score well on them to become a leader. There's many people who decide not to go into leadership roles that do score well on these and make an impact. But to make an impact, they are nailing the assets and the value disciplines around influence and impact as well. It's sort of pretty much a given that on our insights and our core technical skills, as David was pointing out, we are pretty strong. It's not much of a differentiator now, So whether we want to be a leadership or a strong contributor to our organizations, we need to improve our ability or address those deficiencies that, as a professional on average, we're seeing in the spaces of influencing and impacting the business.
Fantastic. Now, Andy, we've just got a few more minutes before we wrap up, but there's certainly just a couple more questions that I'd love to ask. And one is this whole idea of how do we leverage these assets to reach our potential, and just some tips and ideas and things you've seen. And potentially, if we take it a little bit more practical, looking at those case studies you've ran, on where can you go out to your business tomorrow, to the way you deal with the business, the way you deal with stakeholders, the way you run your function. What are some tips? What are some ideas that you're seeing really work that move the dial quickly?
Yeah. So just on that, Brad, like the whole point of value creation and capture has to be practical. We have to put this into practice. All right. So look, one thing I hear is that, from CFOs, there was actually a study done on this by SSON, and they were saying that the biggest challenge for CFOs was that 95% are saying that they have a skills gap. Well, I don't think it's so much a skills gap as more an asset deficiency. And this is what we need to leverage and improve, right? And we're not going to do it by trying to change behaviors off the bat. I hear a lot of CFOs and leaders saying, and professionals ourselves saying, we need to be more commercial. We need to get out ahead of the decision. We need to be more proactive. We need to be more like consultants. How do we put that into practice? Well, I suggest we look at it from an asset perspective, because changing behavior is tough. There was a study done on heart patients who had surgery on their hearts, and they were encouraged to have healthier lifestyles. For the heart, I suppose the heart surgery to have a positive impact. You know, when the researchers followed up, only 1 out of 9 of them managed to adopt a healthier lifestyle. Now, they're the ultimate incentive to avoid death, right? And only 1 from 9 actually chose to change their behavior. So if leaders and if we ourselves think that changing behavior is easy, it's not, right? Let alone change for ourselves, let alone change behavior for other people or even a whole finance team. So, you know, changing behavior is tough. But that said, we know that income or value follows assets. So let's address these asset deficiencies. Let's figure out how to leverage and invest. And you know, let's look at something that should be close to our hearts, our own homes, our own houses. All right. Our houses, a lot of us regard them as assets, whether we rent one or whether we own one. You know, imagine a scenario where we go to work every day, and on one day we go to work, we look up at the ceiling and we say, oh, there's a bit of a stain developing there, a bit of a watermark perhaps, but I'm too busy at work, so I'll go to work and I'll deal with it another time. We get home, and lo and behold, to our surprise, there's a big hole in the ceiling. Yeah, big gaping hole, water dripping down, there's plasterboard on the floor, debris everywhere. Our partner then comes home with the kids, and you're frustrated because you now got to go fix something that you didn't have to fix previously. They're frustrated because the kids are playing with the debris. Everyone's frustrated. Now, the thing is, if the house is our asset and we have a deficiency in that asset because of that hole, right, we wouldn't tolerate it. Yeah, we'd either do something about it ourselves or we get a contractor in to go fix it. So the second place we spend most of our time's work, particularly in our finance world, right? So are we telling ourselves that we're going to tolerate an asset deficiency in our finance world, in our work? We should actually have the same approach. Yeah, because if we don't, you're just going to get a load of frustrated people around us as well as ourselves because it's not working the way we want to. And even the tax authorities recognize this. I used to do the books of landlords as one of my jobs in the UK when I was living there. And their tax authority, and they're not the most commercially minded people. I apologize for people who believe otherwise, but that's just my experience. But they would allow a 10% write-off for repairs and maintenance against the value of the income from that asset every single year without production of any receipts. There's a 10% allocation, right? So if you apply that thinking to our finance organizations, right? Imagine we have a finance team supporting a business with a turnover of $200 million a year, say. And at a world-class standard, finance should cost no more than 1% of that. So let's say $2 million. Are we putting 10% of that 2 million into enhancing our asset deficiency, saying in social intelligence or engagement or how to be better sparring partners? Probably not. I mean, they're not being examined much on our accounting syllabuses, so I don't believe we're probably doing much in our organizations. So we need to perhaps align our thinking. If we want to leverage those assets, is actually regard our challenge not as a behavioral one, but as leveraging our assets. So, you know, and that's another thing as well from a cost perspective I want to point out, is that is it any wonder why any attrition we have in finance potentially costs us more than we see? Or as Gallup recorded in 2017 in their study, that the cost of a disengaged employee is 34% of their salary. So it's a no-brainer to treat our finance teams as assets in place and address those asset deficiencies. So we can do that, right? And as I said, there's two approaches: the do-it-yourself or just the contractor route, right? So the do-it-yourself is possible for us, right? Based on what I learned in the case study, and I've been doing it 3 years, Brad. Approaching this as a leader, as solving asset deficiencies. One is just step back, like that masterpiece example. Step back, either diagnose it ourselves in our own way or use the free web app that I've got up online to understand where we're strong and where we could be better from an asset perspective. The second is some of us will be intuitively stronger in some areas than others. So set up some sort of in-house mentoring program. It's not going to cost an awful lot to do that. Third is a plug for the Strength in the Numbers show. We have a new guest mentor on every single week. And the great thing about them is they break down what they've learned, what's practically work on how to enhance their assets. And by the way, the guest mentors that have done the web app have scored A as value potential or a high B. So they're definitely people worth listening into. And that's another thing as well, is why go to the problem of trial and error all the time? It reminds me of the ship captains years ago when they had the problem of scurvy with their men. They try all these different things like I know, rubbing salt into the scurvy, or drinking vinegar, or abstaining from alcohol, or drinking more alcohol, or praying to the gods. I think leeches were pretty big back then as well. And then the solution was simple. It was just, eating oranges, and that was the sharing of the best practice. So get the best practice from around the world, listen into the show, the guest mentors, on all the major platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Also use the tools we shared, the value logs, the stakeholder analysis, very simple tools. And guess what? They're in Excel. So very easy to follow. Another do-it-yourself method would be, I suppose, to co-invest with a business, hold one-to-ones with them, understand what it is they want, versus what they have, and then start developing those. And if you do the value logs, right? Okay, I'll challenge everyone in the audience. Take on a value log and try and insert one new value log item every single month. And by the end of the year, you've got 12. And if you've not been doing this, you've got 12 areas of value delivered in the year. And guess what? Show that to your business partners and say, this is the value I've contributed for you. You might just make the business case to get that 10% investment in your budget for next year to go and drive tackling those asset deficiencies in other areas, because you've just demonstrated your value to the business. And I've loads of stories of these if people want to talk about it offline, in terms of where we've practically done that over the years. And of course, you can obviously do it in a faster way, get an experienced contractor in. I think the Outperformer does a great job. I've been doing good work in the UK and Ireland. So, there are experienced contractors out there that can speed up the process too. It depends on your budget, your patience, or how frustrated you are. But one thing we can't tolerate, Brad, is we wouldn't tolerate deficiencies in our main assets, our homes. And we spend the second most of our time at work. We shouldn't be tolerating asset deficiencies at work either.
Andy, I totally agree. And I think you've made some hugely valuable contributions today, and I'm very grateful for that. And I think a couple of comments that just came through there, we're grateful of those comments as well. Another interesting piece that I think supports and just adds to what you say is, and it's an interesting piece that we can leave the audience on, is this idea of having leader-led organizational shift in the need to address these assets. If you are in a leadership role, or if you have the ability to influence leadership, that's where the conversation needs to start, by introducing these ideas. And I think you mentioned an interesting piece before about behavior, is that the behavior will follow the asset piece as well. Yes. The view that this is important, the change of mindset, the value creation is important within finance, and then making it tangible and making it something that is measurable will start to change the behavior. And we see this with our clients a lot. We've got for example, very similar to what you've described there, Andy, a concept of a business partnership planner, where essentially we're addressing the strategic awareness, the social piece that you talked about, a few others within that, by identifying the problems that are in your stakeholders' world, by mapping them out, by identifying where the opportunities are to do that, and then by logging it and measuring it and seeing over time how we're progressing. And it's a really simple way, and that's just one of many ways, but a really simple way of reflecting on where our value lies.
It's not rocket science, is it, Brad?
No, well, look, it's certainly not, but it took a lot of it's taken a lot of effort for culture and behavior to change in organizations. So not quite getting man on the moon, but it's certainly something that, as we've seen through today's audience, hundreds of people have joined us to register and been part of this conversation today. And I think it's clearly a big piece that we need to consider is in terms of the future of finance. Now, just wrapping up, we've only got a minute left, but there's just the final one here from Brett, which I think is an interesting question. What advice would you give to an IC that is worried about asking for help and development in the area of such as social intelligence? So if a member of your team comes to you, Andy, and they're looking to address this, they think it's important, what advice would you give them to make, I guess, a valid business case to address it?
Yeah, so on this one, it's very much overlooked, but it does come back with engaging in the business. It is interesting to know that we probably start with a bit of an image challenge in finance. People do think that we're boring and not willing to engage and not willing to help, but I would challenge that. So I would suggest that, I suppose, any individual contributor challenged in this space, go and engage with their business and understand what it is that they want. Yeah, use the stakeholder analysis, because to get the training funds, we need to demonstrate some type of return, right? And remember, income follows assets. So if we can go and identify the value we can offer, the income we can go generate from it, then what is a small expense to go and improve our assets to go and generate that? And I would also encourage that finance isn't the only funding source, because if we've engaged a business and they can see a return, I've had many scenarios in my career and also with people I've worked with as well, that the business has paid for them to go on training. I've had the business pay for finance professionals. By the business, I mean sales teams, ops teams. They've taken money out of their own budget and transferred it to finance to go and address these asset deficiencies, or even hire resources directly because they've seen finance as a value contributor. And I sometimes state those advantages in terms of, these are the number of reps this impact would contribute for you, and you don't need to go and hire any additional staff or headcount, I hate that word, but staff to go fund it. All you need to do is give us some training dollars here and we can go and unlock it for you. Yeah. So it's actually stepping back and staying in that, but do engage the business, because it's got to start with people and delivering value from that, and the value is in the eye of the beholder. So engage Absolutely. With the business, trap it.
That's a really nice point to finish, isn't it? It's to create this business case for change, we need to see where the value lies, and you've highlighted it on many occasions throughout today's conversation around measuring the change, identifying the subjectivity of value in your organization, rather than focusing on the solution, which might be social intelligence for you. What is the benefit of doing such? What is the benefit to the business? How will that unlock? What are the problems we need to solve? And why is it important for us to be involved in those conversations? One of the great things I saw very recently, and I'll just leave this last comment for people here, but it's a really cool one, is a finance team that we were working with were brought in very late to a large project. And because they were brought in late, they identified, ran the numbers, and they could see a major potential impairment that might need to go through the books. Yeah. Now, the GM who was running this particular project was completely unaware, right? They'd moved along, they'd done all the hard work, got right to the end, and finance get involved. And of course, what happened was finance, instead of sharing the importance of this with the GM and anyone else, and the importance of actually bringing them in earlier, simply got in, mopped up the problem, cleaned up the issue, structured everything the right way, and worked very, very long hours to get there, by the way, and of course, moved on. Now, we reflected on that and looked at the value proposition of changing the way that could have been done, and looked at, if we invest early into the notion of what is the value of bringing me in earlier, that GM ran the potential of not having a bonus at the end of the year. And that's what it wants to bring finance in earlier, right? Yeah. And of course, when we start to structure our business case around the things that matter, and if social intelligence is so hard to measure in isolation, working on soft skills is so hard to measure, but the impact that it has in our ability to run our business more effectively and reduce the friction and improve partnership and improve the way we work is where it lies.
Yeah, but Brad, it comes back to those fundamental assets that David mentioned. And a great question, by the way, Brett, but it was actually use those financial analysis skills and strategic awareness, which are our first two assets, to go and drive, and then put those with the engagement and the social intelligence. And there you started creating, capturing value for your organization. So we can leverage those skills we've been developing over thousands of years, the financial analysis and the strategic awareness. Put those together with what we find out when we're engaging with the business and the social intelligence. And there you go, there's your funding case.
Awesome. I love it, Andy. Want to say a huge thank you to Andy Codd. Get online to Strengthen the Numbers, listen to his podcast, have a look at his all of the stuff that he's created to help the community. It's all there. It's all for you to use. He's certainly very generous with his time, with his efforts for the community, and with your time today, Andy. Huge thanks from me, and on behalf of everyone that attended today, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone.
Anytime, anytime. For anyone that's online, just for the last couple of moments, I'd really appreciate, we do have a survey we run at the end of all of our webinars. It's really helpful to us to inform, what we're doing well, what sort of content, what sort of topics we're using, whether this was actually resonating with you, all of those sorts of things. And to make sure that, our efforts at this end are actually useful. So please complete that survey for us. And obviously, if you do want to get in touch with Andy or myself, we're on LinkedIn. Very easy to contact through that. If you want to email me directly and want to get in touch with Andy, I'll very happily arrange time for all that. For anyone that's working on their team and their performance, and if you're on Andy's side of the world, certainly happy to make something happen there. And obviously, if you're on my side of the world and equally want to work on something that's important to your team and this value creation topic, this is certainly where we spend all of our energy these days. So I'll let you all go now. We really, really enjoy what we do here. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks, folks.